Shall we start the session? Is it okay? People can keep joining later. Okay. 1 second, I'll share my screen. Tired screen. My presentation is visible? Okay. Thank you. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Today is the fourth week for this live session conducted by me, and probably this is going to be the last live session conducted by me. So, in this week, we will be in this live session, we will be talking about 3D cell culture and 3D printing. Bioprinting. So, a little bit more extra information than what has been provided in the lecture series. And okay, 1 second. So, a little bit more information about what has been taught, a little bit extra information. I think you have been taught in details about the alginate system for 3D cell culture. So, although there were some 3D cell cultures mentioned in your mentioned in the topic, but they were not covered in detail. So we will just see a short overview of those techniques, and then we will be reading about 3D bioprinting. Okay, and in the end, there are two examples of bio ink, and what they're used for. Okay, so what is 3D cell culture? So, 3D culturing techniques were first proposed in the early 1980s by Mina Bissell, a lead researcher at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. 3D cell culture involves growing living cells within micro-assembled devices that supports 3D structures, mimicking tissue and organ-specific microarchitecture. 1 second. The advances in cell biology enabled the development of a wide range of 3D cell culture technologies such as spheroids, organoids, scaffolds, hydrogels, organ on chips, and 3D bioprinting. 3D cell cultures are used more frequently now as it promotes the understanding of the multi-layer cell culture system over the 2D cell culture system in cancer research. So can any of you tell me why the 3D cell culture is more important compared to the 2D cell culture? Like, what are its advantages? Anybody has any idea? Any idea regarding why 3D cell culture is important compared to 2D cell culture? Yes, correct. It mimics a tumor microenvironment. So, what will be the advantage if it mimics the tumor microenvironment? What will be the advantage if it mimics the tumor? Like, how can it help us in research if it mimics the tumor microenvironment? Yes, you can see the effect of drugs, drug kinetics, the release of drugs, how cells react to the drug. So all of these you can do using 3D cell culture before going for human trials, before going for clinical trials. So if a drug is having some injurious effect to the cells, then you can, reprogram the drug or repurpose the drug. You know what is drug repurposing? Drug repurposing. Any idea about drug repurposing? So basically, drug repurposing is that the drug was developed. Yes. Correct. Using one drug for another aspect of disease. So basically, the drug was developed for a different disease, but now it has been repurposed to target another disease. So that is drug repurposing. So you can check the effect of all those drugs and everything without actually affecting going for clinical trials. Okay. So this is how the 3D cell culture helps us. So that is why nowadays it is more frequently used to understand the multi-layer cell culture system over the 2D cell culture system in cancer research. So this 3D cell culture has a wide application in cancer research. Okay, I guess you have read about hydrogels, how hydrogels are made. Anybody has any idea about organ on chips? Organ on chips. What organ on chips mean? Organ on chip. Yes, representative of an organ, that is true, but organ on a chip is basically you have seen a microfluidic chip. Have you seen a microfluidic chip? So in that microfluidics chip, you basically, it's a small portable chip in that you basically mimic the entire organ and its microenvironment with its interaction with, you just see some organ cells in that, you grow those cells in 3D, and then you mimic the environment of that organ and its interaction with the ECM. So everything can be, it's like a small micro environment you can create inside a microfluidic chip which is portable. So that is why it is called an organ on a chip. I have a picture of the microfluidic chip. So I will show you the chip. That is a non-scaffold based 3D cell culture. So I will show a picture of how a microfluidic chip looks like. Okay, so one second. So basically, so what is a 3D cell culture? In a 3D cell culture, cells can grow and interact with their surroundings in all dimensions, mimicking tissue and organ-specific microarchitecture. The tissues, they are made up of highly complex 3D arrangement of cells, an artificially created environment in which biological cells are permitted to grow or interact with their surroundings in all three dimensions. An improvement over this is an improvement over the previous method of growing cells in 2D. So in 3D cell cultures, what we can do, we can control the scaffold morphology, architecture, and components, human components. So some 3D cell models have been represented here. One is a spheroid, one is an organoid, and this is a 3D co-culture where you can see that the outside some other cell has been cultured, and inside the small vessel another type of cell has been cultured. So this is a 3D co-culture. These are the three kinds of 3D cell culture models. So why we are doing 3D cell culture, why it is important? Because growing cells on flat surfaces is unnatural, and naturally ECM, it plays a very, ECM means extracellular matrix, it plays an important role in regulating cellular behaviors by influencing cells with biochemical signals and topographical cues. So basically cell signaling is a very vast topic, and if you are just growing cells in 2D, you will never understand how the cell signaling occurs. So cell signaling also plays a very vital role in drug delivery. So to understand the signaling between cells, and also ECM also plays a very big role, important role in influencing cell behavior. So this 3D cell culture helps in understanding those aspects. So therefore cells behave and respond more like what it would in vivo to the stimuli. So basically you are simulating an in vivo environment without actually performing in vivo experiments. 2D cell culture substrates not only fall short of reproducing the complex and dynamic environments of the body, but also are likely to misrepresent findings to some degree by forcing cells to adjacent to an artificial flat rigid surfaces. So these matrices or scaffolds, they are porous substrates that can support cell growth, organization, and differentiation on or within the structure. So any example of scaffold you can remember which you can make? Any example of scaffold that you can make? Porous scaffolds. Any example of porous scaffold? You can only make the scaffold, not necessary. Yes, you can make a collagen scaffold, but how will you make it? You can make it using electrospinning. The technique you have been taught electrospinning nanofibers. If you remember, nanofibers had porous structures. It had pores in it, in which you can calculate the pore diameters. You can control the pore size. You can control the pore diameters. You can control the pore size. You can control the pore diameters. So so electrospinning plays a very vital role in generating scaffolds for 3D cell culture. Okay. So they're all interrelated. All those techniques are interrelated. So these matrices or scaffolds are porous substrates that can support cell growth, organization, and differentiation on or within their structure. But you can understand if you make a nanofiber with a material, suppose PVA, you're using PVA. You know what is PVA? Polyvinyl alcohol. So if you're making, suppose a nanofiber with polycaprolactone or polyvinyl alcohol, will cells attach to that scaffold? Will cells attach to the scaffold? Okay. So what do you need to add with it for cell attachment? What do you need? Cross-linking agent. Okay, no, not exactly cross-linking agent. You need you need gelatin. Gelatin helps in cell adhesion. So gelatin can come in any form. We will discuss an example of a bio ink which has been used using gelatin. Or have you heard of the scaffold, a material called gelma? Gelma. Okay, so gelma is basically gelatin and methacrylic acid. So methacrylic acid is the one, it's the polymer thing that will form your fibers or your scaffold with porous structure, and gelatin helps in your cell attachment. So whenever you're going for tissue engineering purposes or 3D cell culture purposes, your scaffold should have a cell adhering, anything that helps in cell adhering. Okay, not just the polymer. You need only polymer solution for electrospinning, but if you are going for 3D cell culture, you're going to be using it as scaffold, then you have to very carefully select your material, because cell adherence is very important to your scaffold. Okay, so other than physical, so these matrices or scaffolds are porous substrates that can support cell growth, organization, and differentiation on or within their structure. Architectural and material diversity is much greater on 3D matrices than on 2D substrates. Other than physical properties, chemical or biochemical modification with specific biological motives to facilitate cell adhesion, cell-mediated proteolytic degradation, and growth factor binding and release. Okay, so apart from helping in physical properties, these all also, the scaffold also helps in these: cell adhesion, cell mediated proteolytic degradation, growth factor binding, and release. So here you can see a picture of 2D cell model and a 3D cell model. You can see that in 2D cell model you have cell to cell interaction, and it limits cells into a single microenvironment, whereas in 3D cell models you have mimicking intra-tissue heterogeneity, and this is suitable for drug screening. Okay, so this is suitable for drug screening. So if you have to screen a drug, this 3D cell models are very useful. So what is the difference between 3D cell culture over 2D cell culture? So you can see in the picture, in 2D cell culture, you have a uniform distribution of molecules, oxygen and chemotherapeutic agents, but there is no natural cell-cell and cell plastic interactions. In 3D cell culture, on the other hand, in the picture, you can see you have cell-cell interactions, you have cell ECM interactions, you can also see ECM cell signaling, nutrients and oxygen gradient. There is a gradient of nutrients and oxygen. Okay, and there is differential drug exposure. So you have so many advantages in 3D cell culture over 2D cell cultures. So here we can see a difference between 2D cell culture and 3D culture. So in 2D culture, cells are grown on flat dishes and cellular attachment is unnatural. In 3D culture, cells attach and form cell-to-cell attachments synthesized by the cells. In 2D culture, cellular communication and signaling are minimal. In 3D culture, cellular communication and signaling are maximized. In 2D culture, in 2D, grown cells are simple with divergent functions from native tissues. In 3D, grown cells have complex phenotype functions that closely mimic native tissues. In 2D cultures, they are not valid for targeting and testing new drug discoveries, and in 3D cultures they are more valid for targeting and testing new drug discoveries. 2D cultures, they form a monolayer of cells, and in 3D cultures multi-layered cells are formed. So what are the advantages of 3D cell culture? Advantages of 3D cell culture is it is more relevant cell model that shows interactions between different types of cells. It better simulates the condition in living organisms. It is more realistic way to grow and treat tumor cells, and it shows the integration of flow, that is it shows the cell signaling, proper cell signaling, and it is better for study purposes, for research purposes. So there are different kinds of 3D cell culture techniques. There are four broad spectrum 3D cell culture techniques. One is scaffold based, second is non-scaffold based, third is bioreactor, third is bioreactors, and fourth is gels. So scaffold based can again be categorized into three types. They are polymeric hard scaffolds. Then you have biologic scaffolds. And third one is micro patterned surface microplates. In non-scaffold, you again have three types of techniques: hanging drop microplates, spheroid microplates containing ultra low attachment coating, and you have microfluidic 3D cell culture, which is basically called organ on a chip. Okay, so scaffold based is the first one, is the polymeric hard scaffold. Here you can see a picture where you can see that in this small well plate, you basically grow your polymeric hard scaffold. You can see, can you see the pictures? This is basically, when you zoom in, you can see this is basically your electrospinning nanofibers to form the scaffold. You take a polymer, you electrospin it, it will form a polymeric hard scaffold. Okay, so typical size is 150 to 200 micrometer. What is the size? 150 to 200 micrometer. The size 150 to 200 micrometer. So in regenerative medicine, cells are grown on the scaffold for transplantation purposes to replace defective tissue, widely used for engineering bone, cartilage, ligament, skin, vascular, neural, and skeletal muscle tissues. Okay, so in preclinical in vitro testing, cells are grown to model tumors in the lab. So basically this polymeric hard scaffold, they're used for tissue engineering for bone, cartilage, ligament, skin, vascular, neural and skeletal muscle tissues. Okay, so main purpose of polymeric hard scaffold is transplantation purposes. Biological scaffold, what is the use of this biological scaffold? They're produced from natural components of biological origin, for example, proteins such as fibronectin, collagen, laminin, and gelatin. Cells attach and reorganize into the desired organ's 3D structure. It provides a microenvironment suitable for anatomical and physiological development of cells. They are widely used in regenerative medicine as well as tissue engineering. So here you can see a picture of biological scaffold where you are growing cells, you're giving growth factors and mechanical stimulus. The cells grow according to the organ's 3D structure. Then it is implanted in the basically from the human you are taking sample, you're taking a biopsy sample, you are isolating the cells, you are cultivating the cells, cell proliferation, you are giving scaffold and tissue development, adding growth factors and mechanical stimulus. It is growing into the desired organs 3D structure, and then you are implanting it back into the human being. Okay, so this is the use for biological scaffold. Then the third one in scaffold based technique is micro patterned surface microplates. So each plate contains micrometer size compartments arrayed on the bottom. So here you can see this 3D patterns you can see at the bottom. The first one is showing small spaces. The second one is showing medium spaces. The second one is showing medium spaces, and the third one is showing bigger spaces. So you can see the different kinds of cell growth has occurred. Okay, so here you can see the 3D patterning. For the first one is 3 micrometer, for the second one it is 8 micrometer. For the second one, it is 8 micrometer, and for the third one, it is 20 micrometer. So each plate contains micrometer sized compartments added on the bottom. So these are small compartments. These are small compartments that are added at the bottom. These are the arrays at the bottom they're talking about. Okay, so they're usually coated to create a low adhesion surface. The bottom is thin and transparent for microscopic imaging, and it is used in drug testing, cell biology analysis at the molecular level. Then we come to non-scaffold based techniques. So there are 3 non-scaffold based techniques. The first one is the hanging drop microplates. So in the hanging drop microplate, cells can self-assemble in a 3D spheroid structure in the absence of a scaffold. The spheroid size is controlled by the number of cells dispensed into each drop. This is suitable for long-term culturing by transfer of culture onto another plate of larger media or buffer volumes, and they are also suitable for use as primary cell-based tissue models and tumor models that include immortalized cancer cell lines. So here you can see a picture of a hanging drop microplate in which you can see you have a tray. In the side you can see a reservoir and the hanging drop plate in which you can see the drops are hanging and where your spheroid formation takes place. So you can see this is your hanging drop, your cells aggregate, and then it forms a spheroid. The size of the spheroid depends upon the number of cells seeded in this drop. Then we come to the second technique, which is the spheroid microplate. So in the spheroid microplate, it is used to create round multi-cell tissue or tumor models, wells are shaped to a depth of an SNS 96 microplate. They are widely used for experimental purposes, and ULA is used to coat the bottom to minimize cell adherence for spheroid formation. So if you have too much of cell adherence, then the cells will become flat. So ULA, there is a bottom coating of ULA so that it forms a spheroid. So this is suppose a representation of a microplate. You can see one well of the microplate in which the bottom is coated with ULA and you have spheroid formation on top of it. Then you come to non-scaffold based third technique, which is microfluidic. So here you can see a picture of the microfluidic. This is a very small chip. The chip you can hold it in hand. It's a very small chip, and you can see there are different channels. So basically, different channels will provide. One will provide growth factors. One will provide extra mechanical stimuli. One, so different kinds of environment you can provide, and the cells will grow in 3D here. So this is why it is called an organ on a chip. So it's a very uh, advanced technique for growing cells in 3D, and it takes a lot of time to develop a microfluidic chip, because you have to design the microfluidic chip. You have to simulate the flow rate to optimize which flow rate you should be using for which cell type, to for it to grow according to your requirement. So it is a different study altogether, microfluidics. So microfluidic is used to create 3D architecture of in vivo tissues and tumors, to create heterogeneous models. So it is not necessary you're growing one type of cell. You can grow multiple different kinds of cells in each. So suppose you have here in this blue thing, you can see this blue channel. It has 4 points. So in 4 points, you can grow 4 different types of cell. So it can serve as a heterogeneous model, permits the continuous supply of necessary nutrients and growth requirements, as well as waste removal through the culture medium. So different channels can provide different nutrients, different growth requirements, and you can also make channels for waste removal. So it will basically work like a small body, complete body system out of the body. So it contains physical barriers that are made up of silicon polymers such as polycarbonate PC. This, I think I've made a mistake here somewhere. I will correct this. Polymers such as polycarbonate, polystyrene, and chromatographic or filtered paper. So, anybody knows how a lateral flow assay is made? Anybody has any idea about how a lateral flow assay is made? So lateral flow assay is okay. So lateral flow assay is also a very complex technique. It is a colorimetric technique. You see strips. You have a positive strip which will come always, like a control strip, and then you have the second strip, which if it is positive, the line will come. If it is negative, the line will not come. But the control line has to come for each test. If the control line doesn't come, then your lateral flow assay kit is it is faulty. So the most widely used lateral flow assay kit is the pregnancy test kit. Have you ever seen a pregnancy test kit? How it looks like? It is small. Yes, like the COVID antigen kit, that is a lateral flow assay. So that antigen kit has been developed on the basis, the first lateral flow assay kit which is widely used is the pregnancy test kit, and which measures the HCG levels in urine. So the COVID antigen kit was based on the same principle, which tested the coat protein of the virus. Just like a temporary confirmatory, and then they did real-time PCR to finally confirm if it is a false positive or not. So that lateral flow assay also has different components. So you have a sample pad, you have a absorbing pad, and then you have a sample pad, and absorbing pad is in the end, and then you have a pad in between which will wick the fluid. So when you are putting a sample in the sample pad, the sample pad will absorb it, and the absorbing pad will pull it downwards towards itself, so that your sample runs through the actual place where your reaction will take place. So the components of, I will not go into details of the components of lateral flow assay, but the components of lateral flow assays are also very very complex, it has multiple parts. So similarly, for this microfluidic also, you can make different, you have to make different channels with different diameters, different flow rates, and you can use chromatographic or filter paper for different purposes. So depending on the what is your purpose, what you will be designing your own microfluidic chip. So cells may be combined with a matrix to encourage cell ECM interaction for assembly of 3D structures. Suitable, this type of technique is suitable for stem cells, primary and cancer cells. Then another technique you have is bioreactor. So this is ideal for mass cell production and ex vivo tissue engineering applications. It is suitable for cell expansion applications or scaled production of cellular products such as antibodies. So bioreactors for 3D cell culture fall into four main categories. One is the spinner flask. Second is the low shear stress rotating wall vessels. Third is perfusion bioreactors, and fourth is a combination of bioreactors with scaffolds. So this is the fourth one represented here, a combination of bioreactors with scaffold. Here you can see you have an alginate solution, you have an intermediate solution, and you have the stem cells and matrix. You're adding it, and you have created a gelatin calcium bath. Then what you're doing is you have your cells. So you have your seeded cells, there is self-organization, then 3D self-assembly. This is entirely occurring in your bioreactor. So what you're doing is you will take your cell from the bioreactor, you will dilute the capsule, then cell dissociation, then you will again add it to the matrix, you will coat it with gelation calcium bath, sorry, not gelatin, gelation calcium bath, and then you will add it to the bioreactor again. Then again you will be providing the optimum conditions for cell seeding, then self-organization, and then 3D stem cell colony. Okay, so this is how a bioreactor works, and it is for mass scale production. This is mostly used in industries. Okay. Then the fourth one is gels. It has a soft tissue-like stiffness that mimics the ECM, can be made from ECM mixtures of natural sources such as collagen and alginate. Their most widely used gel is Matri-gel. Synthetic gels include hydrogels and PEG, polyethylene glycol-based gels. They are difficult to use due to inability to maintain viscosity and may be used in combination with other methods. So here is a small example in which you have a base layer, then you have a cell layer, and then you have a gel matrix layer on top. So this is how the 3D cell growth occurs in using gels. Then what is the application of 3D cell cultures? There are various applications of 3D cell culture. First is clinical application. So 3D cultures, they mimic real human tissue way better than flat 2D ones. So doctors and scientists can test treatments in a more realistic environment before human trials. For regenerative medicines, you can use 3D cell cultures because cells grown in 3D can actually form tissues such as mini organs. So this helps in repairing or replacing damaged tissues like skin grafts, cartilage, or even organ patches. Third application is drug discovery process. Pharma companies can test new drugs on 3D grown cells to see how they respond. This helps in better prediction of drug effects, fewer failures in clinical trials, and possibly safer medicines. Fourth application is in vitro studies. 3D cultures basically act like mini body systems in a dish. So they let researchers observe how cells behave naturally, interact, and respond to conditions without needing live animals or humans. So you do not need ethical clearance. If you are using animals or humans, you need a lot of ethical clearance for animal testing. So those ethical permission and clearance is not needed if you're using 3D cell cultures. So analysis of cell biology at the molecular level. With 3D growth, cells act more like they do inside the body. So scientists can study genes, proteins, and signaling pathways as they actually function in real tissues. However, there are certain limitations of 3D cell cultures. What are them? They are expensive materials and equipment are required compared to 2D cultures. They require skilled handling and specialized expertise. It is hard to maintain a uniform nutrient and oxygen supply inside the 3D tissue. If you remember this picture, um, where okay, this picture, so you can see in 2D cell culture you have a uniform distribution of oxygen and nutrients and other molecules, but in 3D cell culture you can see there is a gradient of nutrients and oxygen, so it is difficult to maintain the uniformity. Standardization is difficult because results may vary between labs, and scaling up for industrial use is still challenging. So with 3D cell culture techniques, the next technique that we come to is 3D bioprinting. So what is 3D bioprinting? Bioprinting is the layer by layer deposition of cells to create 3D tissue that closely resembles native tissue in form and function from basic biological building blocks. So for 3D bioprinting, what is the first thing that you would need? For 3D bioprinting, what is the first thing you would need? Bio ink, correct. So you would need a bio ink for 3D bioprinting. So for any printing purposes, you need a ink. So when you are doing bioprinting, you need bio ink. So it is layered by layer deposition of cells to create 3D tissue. So that closely resembles, 3D bioprinting is widely used nowadays. Can you tell what it is used mostly nowadays for? What is the widest application of 3D bioprinting now? Yes, skin grafts to be exact. Skin grafts. People who have, suffered burn injuries. So nowadays, skin grafting is being performed using 3D bioprinting. And so basically, because you do not need to graft, you do not need to search for a host with whom your cell type or everything will match, or else there will be a graft rejection. You don't want to, so the advantage of this technique is from your own body, from the patient's body, cells will be isolated and ink will be made, and then you 3D print the skin and put it in the patient. You transplant in the patient. So as a result, what happens? There is, you avoid the host graft rejection altogether, which is very dangerous when you perform a graft. So nowadays, skin grafting is widely being used for using 3D bioprinting. So you need basic biological building materials for making bio ink. So first we will see an overview of the bioprinting process. So how does the bioprinting process occur? So the first thing you need is a CAD model. Do you know what is a CAD model? Do you know what is a CAD model? CAD. Yes, it is a 3D model. Do you know any software where you can do CAD? Basically, CAD means computer aided design. Any software you can use for CAD modeling. You can use a software as like Blender, which is little bit yes, you can use Blender, but it is little bit difficult to use Blender. Easier versions are Fusion 360, and there is another one which name I cannot remember. I will let you know if I recollect the name. There is another 3D modeling, CAD modeling software. Okay. So basically, the first thing that you have to do is you have to make a CAD model. So you have to download a software. You have to make your own model using 3D model. You have to make a 3D model using that software, which will be, so you have to okay, you have another one called AutoCAD. AutoCAD is Fusion 360, same AutoCAD. And you have SolidWorks. I could not remember the name. SolidWorks. Okay. So you have different kinds of 3D modeling software. You will use this software to make your CAD model first. Then you have to save that CAD model file as .stl file. Okay. You have to save it as .stl file. You have to then download another software, which is a slicing software. So here two examples of slicing software has been given, like ZSuit and Idea Maker. Okay. So you have to download a slicing software. Then you have to slice your 3D model into layers. So because it is layer by layer printing, from bottom to top the printer will print, you have to slice your 3D model into different each layer, and then one by layer it will be printed. Then you put this sliced file into your 3D printer, and your 3D printer will print it, and you will get your 3D printed object. Okay, so this is the entire 3D printing process. So to successfully create bioprinted tissues, it is necessary to first generate the printing path. So how will you generate the printing path? The printing path is basically the CAD model, then the STL file. Using the slicing software, you slice it. This is your generation of the printing path. Then you select the appropriate bio ink, and you control the bioprinter and perform quality control after printing. Okay. So first we will come to the first thing, that is generating the printing paths. So what you have to do is you have to create a 3D model. So the correct anatomical shape of the desired tissue construct is achieved by representing clinical imaging like CT or MRI data as a computer 3D model. So STL file format as an intermediate between model and print path generation. So what you have to do is first to construct the tissue, you have to take a clinical imaging using CT or MRI. Then this is a DICOM format. Then you have to convert it into the same 3D CAD model, okay, and save it as an STL file, which will be an STL format. Okay. So this is your creation of the 3D model. Then what you have to do, then second step is slicing. In a process analogous to histological sectioning, printing paths are created by slicing these STL model into layers and creating bioprinter tool paths that trace out the perimeter and interior features of each slice. Okay, so you have the model. So for printing, what you have to do is you have to slice it first. So you are slicing, you can see a cone here. So it has been sliced into different layers, and each layer will be then printed by the printer. Okay, so slicing is very important step. Then third is selecting the appropriate bio ink. So for selecting the appropriate bio ink, what you have, the bio ink is the bioprintable material consisting of living cells and biomaterials that resemble the ECM to support cells. So what you have in 3D bioprinting is you have in bio ink, you have living cells, then you have biomaterials that will resemble the ECM to support the cells. An ideal bio ink should possess proper mechanical, rheological, and biological properties of the target tissues. So the first thing that you should do after your printing is done is you should be testing the mechanical, rheological, and biological property of your printed tissue. And if you see that it is not appropriate according to your target organ, then again you have to optimize your bio ink accordingly, and then you have to print again. So basically the bottleneck of this is your bio ink preparation, your bio ink selection, your bio ink preparation, what materials you're using. So this is your bottleneck for 3D bioprinting. So for 3D bioprinting in the composite bioink, what you have polymers, you can have bioactive inorganic fillers, and you will have cells. You will 3D bioprint it, and what will be the applications? What will be the applications of what will be the applications of these is you can go for bone osteochondral repair, vascularization, soft tissue engineering, as well as drug delivery. Okay. So there are different classification of bioink. The first one again is scaffold-based bioinks and scaffold-free bioinks. So scaffold-based bioinks is it consists of cells dispersed within biomaterials that help to create a conducive environment for cell proliferation as well as providing structural support. So that is your scaffold-based bioinks. And in scaffold-free bioinks, you have cells which are bioprinted without supporting hydrogel, and therefore the cells are loaded in higher concentration, which then deposit their own ECM. So basically in the scaffold based bioinks, you're already providing the scaffold for cell growth, and in scaffold free bioinks, you're depositing a higher concentration of cells, and then the cells, they themselves will deposit their own ECM. So, scaffold based bioinks, the types of bioinks that are used is hydrogel, which are natural, which are of three types: natural, including collagen, fibrin, chitosan, and alginate. Then you have synthetic types, including methacrylated gelatin, which is called gelma, pluronic, and polyethylene glycol. And then you can also have a hybrid hydrogel. The next type of bioink which is used is decellularized matrix components obtained by chopping tissue into small fragments, lysing the cells and extracting the remaining ECM. So here you see an example of a scaffold-based bioinks. The third one is microcarriers, which have been recently used in bioprinting to increase the cell density in bioinks. They are porous particles designed to promote cell attachment, survival, and expansion. So for scaffold-based bioinks, you have microcarriers, you have porous scaffolds, you have hydrogels, and you have fiber scaffolds. So for consideration for scaffold selection, you need to have effects on taste, nutrition, and food safety. So basically you take biopsy from live animals, you isolate the cells, then you prepare the different scaffolds like microcarriers, porous scaffolds, hydrogels or fiber scaffolds, then you 3D print and other additive techniques, and suppose you are using it for cultivating meat. So the considerations for this purpose is you have for scaffold selection will be effects on taste, nutrition, and food safety, ability to facilitate oxygen, nutrient, and waste transport, cost and scalability. So basically you're making synthetic meat. You are in a way synthetic meat means it is not directly coming from animals, it is indirectly coming from animals. Okay, so these will be, so for that cultivated meat generation, you need to have considerations for scaffold selection. So these are the considerations you need to have. So what will be the cell source for your bioink? So the cell component of the bioink should be autologous and patient specific. So you can take stem cells and then you can add differentiating factors and differentiate them into cardiac cells, enterocytes, fat cells, red blood cells, chondrocytes, epithelial, neuron, or blastocyst. So, what is the use of stem cells in 3D bioprinting? So, stem cells have the properties of self renewal and potency, representing an unlimited cell source for 3D bioprinting and regenerative medicine. However, autologous adult stem cells have to be obtained invasively through bone marrow harvesting, adipose tissue extraction by liposuction, or least invasively using blood apheresis. In 2006, with the discovery of human-induced pluripotent stem cells, patient-specific stem cell lines can now be created from mature cell types such as peripheral blood mononuclear cells by venipuncture or dermal skin fibroblasts by skin biopsy. This ability to reprogram patient-specific cells also allows for the creation of stem cells containing heritable mutations which can then be bioprinted and studied. Is it clear till now? Did you understand? Any queries so far? Okay. So you can see that this has the potential to improve current understanding of disease mechanisms and phenotypic variability while minimizing rejection when transplanted back into the host for the purposes of tissue regeneration. Okay, so what you have is you take fibroblast skin cells. So you can see from a human body, you can take different kinds of cells. You can take skin cells, fibroblast, you can culture them. Then you can do a viral reprogramming and you can get induced pluripotent stem cells. So this can serve as one source. The other one you can take is bone marrow derived mesenchymal stem cells. From there you can get adult stem cells. The third one is from blastocyst. You can culture cells and you will get embryonic stem cells. So all these three kinds you can stem cell sources you can use for 3D bioprinting. So out of which induced pluripotent stem cells, they are mostly preferred. So organ 3D bioprinting overview. So what you have to do in organ printing overview, organ 3D bioprinting overview is you take a biopsy sample, you isolate the cells, you culture the cells, cell expansion, you grow the cells, then you prepare bio ink using you have to add other biomaterials for scaffold formation if you want to make a scaffold based bio ink, and if not you have to seed a higher number of cells to form scaffold free bio ink. Okay, then you 3D print it. You have to first make the design of the organ. You have to take a clinical imaging. You have to use a clinical imaging technique like CT scan or MRI to make a DICOM file. Then you have to convert it into a CAD file. You have to make a 3D model using a CAD software where you will generate an STL file. You have to slice that file using a slicing software to form layers for 3D printing, and then you have to feed that file into your 3D printer to get your 3D printed tissue or organ. Then you have to grow the organ. You have to provide the growth factors and necessary factors needed for organ growth. And when the organ is grown, you can transplant it back into the patient. But can you use 3D bioprinting for printing highly vascular organs? Can you use 3D bioprinting for printing highly vascular organs? Okay, why? What is the reason? Why you can't use 3D bioprinting for printing highly vascular organs? Any idea? Yes, it has a complex anatomy. It is highly vascular. So mimicking it, designing it and mimicking it is very difficult. So till date, highly vasculated organs have not been, 3D printed. Okay. So if you see a picture where a highly vascular organ is represented, it is just for representation. It's not like it is can really be grown using 3D printing. So the biggest use of 3D printing, can you tell me what will be the biggest use of 3D printing? Like why they are actively working to even, target, uh, like it is their aim to develop uh, to develop complex, highly vasculated organs as well. But why is that? Why they? Yeah, autograph from host itself, that is one reason. But why they are targeting to develop organs? You know that the pressure on, the organ demand is too high for transplantation. Lot the recipient list, organ recipient list is very big, and the donor list is very less. So getting a donor from a natural source is very difficult. So people are waiting, for years in the donor, in the recipient list. Some people are even dying without getting any organ transplantation. So researchers are actively working to develop organs like this, so that, the burden on, receiving an organ from, being reliant on a donor for organs is reduced. Till now, scientists are working. There is one paper, you guys can look into that paper. I do not have that example of that paper here, but that example is where they used a plant leaf. They decellularized it, and then they, reprogrammed the cells to form heart cells, cardiac cells. And that leaf, it started beating like a heart. So that is probably a stepping stone for, tissue engineering for, forming heart. So you can search for that paper, and you can read how they did it. It's a very interesting technique they used. Very innovative and interesting technique they used. So that leaf, it developed vessels, because the leaf already has a very intricate vessel system. So those vessels only worked as heart vessels when you reprogrammed it. So you can read that paper if you want. So moving on, you have to start bioprint. So another thing which is very important, what you need cells plus polymers, and you need a cross-linker which will form your bio ink. Okay. So these three things are needed in your bio ink, and you need a printer. So you need a printer. So in the printer, three different kinds of printer. I think you have already been taught about this. Three different kinds of printers are there: extrusion based bioprinting, or extrusion based bioprinters, inkjet based bioprinting or inkjet based bioprinters, and laser assisted bioprinting or laser assisted bioprinters. So you have a piezoelectric actuator or heater for extrusion based bioprinting and inkjet based bioprinting, and you have a polymer based ink. Whereas for laser assisted printing, you have a laser pulse, you have a donor slide, and you have an energy absorbing layer, and that's how the printing occurs. So you can see that using this bioprinting, you can use it as an in vitro disease model. You can use this bioprinted things for drug screening, and you can also use for tissue engineering. So these are the potential applications. So the first printer is an inject 3D bioprinting. So what you have a vessel in which you are putting your bio ink. You have a heater which is a piezoelectric heater. You have vapor bubble, and then the printing is happening. So bio ink is stored in the ink cartridge, which is connected to a printer head and acts as the source during the electronically controlled printing process. During printing, the printer heads are squeezed by a thermal or piezoelectric actuator to generate droplets of a controllable size. So basically, you can generate droplets of different sizes depending on your requirement using inject 3D bioprinting. This one is the thermal one. The second type of inject 3D bioprinting is piezoelectric. So this one, so you can see it is written the printer heads are squeezed by a thermal or piezoelectric actuator. So this picture, the first one is a thermal where you have a heater, and the second one is a piezoelectric actuator. Okay, the mode of functioning is same, only the during the printer heads are they're squeezed by different this droplet generation is by using different processes. So what are the advantages of inkjet printing? It includes a low cost due to similar structure with commercial printers. It has high printing speed and it has relatively high cell viability, usually from 80 to 90%. Then we come to extrusion based bioprinting. So extrusion based bioprinting, it is a modification of inkjet printing. So in order to print the viscous materials, inkjet printers, they cannot deposit. So extrusion printing uses either an air force pump, piston or a mechanical screw plunger to dispense bio inks. So if your bio ink is very viscous, then you will have problems in inkjet printing. So this is a variation of the inkjet printer in which you are having a piston. Either you're having a piston or air force pump or a mechanical screw. So all those three kinds are represented here. The first one is a piston where you have your bio ink and cells. You have a positive displacement. You push the piston and it is extruded through the nozzle. The second one is an air pressure technique where you're putting air pressure and extruding through the nozzle. The third one is a rotary screw, is you have a valve, you rotate the screw and it will extrude the bio ink through the nozzle. Then third one is laser assisted bioprinting. So in laser assisted bioprinting, you have a focused laser pulse is applied to stimulate a small area of the absorbing layer. This laser pulse vaporizes a portion of the donor layer, creating a high pressure bubble at the interface of the bioink layer and propelling the suspended bioink. So basically you have a gold absorbing layer, which is your absorbing layer, and you have the bio ink absorbed on the absorbing layer. Then you're focusing a laser on the absorbing layer, and in the bio ink what you have you have a high pressure bubble. A bubble is created and the bio ink layer, it is propelled, and the suspended bio ink then gets deposited on the receiving substrate. Okay. So this is how your laser assisted bioprinting works. So these are the applications of 3D bioprinting. So there are various applications of 3D bioprinting like organ regeneration. You can use it for bone tissue engineering, for drug development, for skin tissue engineering, and you can also use it for developing medical devices. Now we come to advanced bioinks for 3D printing. There are various advanced bioinks for 3D printing. Any questions so far? Contractile biometric from a... Okay, 1 second. I will check. Biomaterials. Is the paper, is the journal biomaterials? I'll give you a picture link. 1 second. It is developed by Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Developed by, okay, developed by WPI. Yes, then it is the same one. Okay, so any questions so far? Okay. Any questions so far? Any questions regarding 3D bioprinting, how the process of 3D bioprinting is done? Any questions about bioink? Then we will move on to advanced bioinks, which are mostly used nowadays. Advanced bioinks. Recent trends. Okay, so I will move ahead. So advanced bioinks for 3D printing. So there are two kinds of advanced bioinks nowadays that are being used for 3D bioprinting. One is multi-material bioinks, another is a nano-composite bioink. Multi-material multi-material bioinks and nano-composite bioinks. So multi-material bioink is two or more materials, they're combined together. For nano-composite bioinks, their nanoparticles are incorporated in the biomaterial. Multi-material bioinks, they contain characteristics of both polymer combined together. Nanocomposite is small amounts of nanoparticles added to polymer can change various physical and chemical characteristics of bioink. Multi-material bioink strength is improved by cross-linking, and nanocomposite bioink can be used as targeting drug delivery vehicle. Multi-material bioinks' rheological properties can be modified by combining different polymers, and nanocomposite bioinks, they have lower risk of bacterial contamination. Okay, so these are two different kinds of advanced bioinks that are nowadays used. So this is a graph which shows characteristics of an advanced bioink. So you can see traditional bioink, they had low printability and low biocompatibility. So it had some cytotoxic effects and some deformities, okay, in printability. But with increase in the formation of advanced bioinks, you can see that slowly you are getting well printed structures. So they are ideal links for 3D printing, and the biocompatibility, that is cell adhesion and proliferation. Cell adhesion and proliferation also cell adhesion and proliferation also increases rapidly. Okay, so they're ideal for cell culture hydrogels. So nowadays, that is why these advanced bioinks are used compared to traditional bioinks. So what are these advanced bioinks? So multi-material bioinks for 3D bioprinting. So you can see you have here you have a stage XYZ stage. Anybody has seen a 3D printer, how it looks like? Have you seen a 3D printer? Have you seen how a 3D printer? Okay. So if you have seen how a 3D printer looks like, you would know that 3D printers have, 3D printers, they have a stage on which it is printed. So when you have a screen where it is shown that how you will where you will position on the stage, at which place of the stage your thing will be printed. uh, to define that, you have you have coordinates mentioned, x, y, z. So Cartesian coordinates. Okay, so that is why it is called the XYZ stage. So on this stage, you have a 3-axis stage controller, and you have a heating unit. You have different multi cartridge model. So each will have different building blocks. You can see. Okay, so each one is having different building blocks or different materials, and you have a heating unit. These are all pressure controlled. So and it will give you a 3D printed construct. So basically, you are not mixing all of them together and forming one bio ink. You are having different materials in different nozzles and using pressure to control which one will be extruded and in how much quantity. And slowly you are constructing, you are 3D constructing it. This is a multi-head bioprinter, which is using multi-material for bioprinting. So multi-material hydrogens are the most widely investigated bioinks to overcome the limitations of single component hydrogels. Multi-head printer is used to print a complex interwoven scaffold consisting of hydrogel bioinks. At a time, only one extruder prints. So a heater can be attached to extrude if the material is difficult to extrude without melting. So can you tell me what variation this is? Can you tell me what variation this is, this multi-head bioprinter? What kind of combination this is? We talked about 3 kinds of printers right now. Inkjet printer, extrusion printer, and laser assisted printing. Can you tell me what kind of printing is happening here in this multi-head printer? By seeing the picture. Yes, extrusion based, true, because you have a pressure controller, but as well as inkjet printing. Heating unit, you have a heating unit as well. Both. So they're combining both. They're putting multiple nozzles with multiple solutions, and they're using both. If it is viscous solution and the pressure is not enough, you can also heat it. So they're using techniques of both inkjet printing and extrusion printing in this multi-head printer. But mostly it is extrusion printing. Okay, so multi-material bioinks for 3D bioprinting. What are the advantages and disadvantages? Advantages is that characteristics of different polymers, they can be combined. They can better mimic native cellular microenvironment, better rheological characteristics, better printability, and more cross-linking increases their strength. However, there are certain disadvantages like it decreases cell compatibility, may lose structural integrity. They require more time for printing because you have so many nozzles, you have to optimize so many parameters. What pressure will be given to print from one nozzle, then what will be the flow rate from that nozzle, everything has to be optimized. So if you have more number of nozzles, then you have more factors which you need to optimize. As a result, the time required for printing will be more. Then you have curing step is required during printing to stimulate the cross-linking. You know what is curing? Curing in, you know what is curing in printing? Curing? Yes. So basically, your curing is basically the stage or the bed, you call it, of the printer on which your your design has been printed. It is basically in semi solid form. So in order to make it completely, solid or completely, for in this case, for if you're printing toys, it's not a bio printer. You have to make it solid. So you have to solidify the solution. Uh, like for example, if I'm giving an example of a resin printer. Your resin is liquid. When you're printing it, it is kind of semi-solid. So when you're curing it, the resin it cross-links using it either uses UV or it heats up the bed. If you have a different polymer solution, instead of resin printer you have a different polymer, it will heat the polymer, it will melt the polymer, and then again it has to reheat the polymer so that it solidifies. So curing is basically done either by heating the bed on which your design has been printed, so the temperature is pretty high, and the other is one is where you're basically the solvent is evaporating. And for resin printing, basically resins, you're using a UV light for cross linking. So in this case, for bio inks you do not use UV, so you have a curing step. Because you have to stimulate the cross-linking. Without the curing step, your design will deform. Okay, example of multi-material bio-ink is bio-ink consisting of gelatin, methacrylate, gelma, and polyethylene glycol PEG, which is acting as the cross-linker. So here you can see in the picture, the length of PEG cross-linker can be modulated to control the mechanical properties of the printed structures. So you know that a PEG of different sizes are available. So you can use different PEG of different sizes of different molecular weights to be used as cross-linker depending on what kind of mechanical property you need for your printed structures. So 3D printed structures, they show high cell viability and support cell proliferation. So here you have, you can see bio-ink components are cells, you have PEG cross-linker, and you have the polymer. In this case, the polymer is gelatin methacrylate, which is a type of, is it a natural or a synthetic polymer? Natural or a synthetic polymer? Gelatin, what kind of polymer, what kind of material it is?
Natural.
Gelatin is natural. Methacrylate is synthetic. So it's actually
Synthetic.
hybrid. Yes. Okay. Uh, so you have a bio ink which is lightly cross-linked. Okay, and then after the printing is done, after the printing is done, you cure your printed structure, and then it will become more heavily cross-linked, and you will get a robust gel. So this is an example of a multi-material bio ink. Then we come to the next one, which is a nanocomposite bio ink for 3D bioprinting. So in the nanocomposite bio ink, what you're doing is you have to synthesize a nanomaterial, then you have to take a polymer matrix in which you have to embed your nano material. So nanocomposite bio ink have been obtained from the combination of hydrogel biomaterial and nanoparticles. So nanomaterials are used like gold nanoparticles, nanosilicates, nanocellulose, hydroxyapatite, etc. Hydroxyapatite will be used for what kind of tissue engineering? Hydroxyapatite, yes, bone grafts, correct. So if you have to make bone grafts or for bone tissue engineering, you have to use hydroxyapatite. So nanoparticles, also called nanofillers, they reinforce hydrogel based bio inks. So you can use different nanomaterials. Nanosilicates means any idea? Nanosilicate? Okay, we will come to that. Nanosilicates. So types of nanoparticles that you can use for nanocomposite bio ink formation is you can use carbonaceous filler like graphene, carbon nanotubes. Carbon nanotubes are of two types. I think I've talked about it in some other live session. Single walled carbon nanotube and multi walled carbon nanotube. And you have graphene, which is basically a single sheet of graphite. Graphite is stacks of graphene. Okay, then you have metallic nanoparticles, for example, gold nanoparticles, and you can use clay based fillers like laponite, mont morillonite, and silica. That is silica nanoparticles. Okay, these are the nanosilicates we were talking about. So you can use this clay based fillers as well for bioink, nanocomposite bioink formation. So what are the advantages of nanocomposite bioink is that they have enhanced electrical conductivity. Do you know why it has enhanced electrical conductivity? Because you can see if you use carbonaceous filler like graphene or carbon nanotubes, they are conductive materials. So as a result, the electrical conductivity of that nano composite ink will be more. They enhance printability. They have enhanced printability, enhanced strength, shear thinning, sorry, it's a spelling mistake, shear thinning, and improved functionality. So this single wall carbon nanotube, this carbon nanotubes, they were the ones which provide, if you use them, they provide enhanced strength, because they are very, they can, their mechanical strength is very high. Disadvantages, there are certain disadvantages of nanocomposite biome. That is, they accumulate in specific tissues. They may cause carcinogenic effects. You can see that carbon nanotubes, you can see carbon nanotubes, they have, they are not exactly, biocompatible. Okay, so they may cause carcinogenic effect, may be immunogenic. That is, it can cause an immunogenic response in the body. They are not biodegradable, and they can be of high cost. So if you use gold nanoparticles, we know the cost of gold is high. So if you use gold nanoparticles, so obviously the cost of the ink will be higher, even if it is in nano form. So example of nanocomposite bio ink is shear thinning hydrogels, which is prepared by combining synthetic nanosilicates with gelatin methacrylate. So you are using gelatin methacrylate as the shear thinning hydrogel, and you're combining it with synthetic nanosilicates. The addition of nanosilicates to GELMA results in high print fidelity and structural stability. After UV, that is curing or cross-linking increases, and printed hydrogel shows high physiological stability. Okay. So this is a example of a formation of nanocomposite hydrogels. So here you can see that you are using GELMA and nanosilicates of 25 to 30 nanometer size or 1. Okay. And then you are forming a nanocomposite hydrogel. Okay. This is the one you are using UV to cure it and forming. 1 second. So you can have UV to cure it, and you will have where is it? Okay, you have a nanocomposite hydrogel formation. Then what is the effect of adding nanosilicate nanoparticles? You can see the effect they have shown. Here is a picture represented where they have, formed a shear thinning hydrogel using GELMA, and then incorporated nanosilicates in it. When they have only used GELMA, so you see the printing gelatin methacrylate without adding nanosilicate nanoparticles, you can see it is deformed. Okay, it is deformed, the structure is not properly printed, but when you are adding nanosilicates, you can see the structure is very well printed. So printing gelatin methacrylate with adding nanosilicate nanoparticles, you can see the side view as well as the top view, how nicely it has been printed. So basically it increased the structural, like it said, it increases the physiological stability and high print fidelity. So the printing fidelity of the bioink increases by adding this nanosilicates. So conclusion is basically you have you have different desired properties in the bioink. What are the desired properties you need in the bioink? First is printability. You need a bioink which is able to print well. Okay, the structure should be well defined, and it should not be deformed. It should be cytocompatibility, that is, since you're making bioink and the application is probably, you are putting it inside a human body, you're transplanting it back inside a human body. So it should be cytocompatible. Okay. So biodegradability. So in any case, if it needs to be degraded, if the application is, suppose you want drug delivery, so you are transplanting it onto the body or inside the body, and then it is biodegrading by itself. It has to be biodegradable. Then it has to shape retention for a long time. So if you have organ, if you printed an organ or something, it has to retain the shape for a long time. High mechanical strength and structural fidelity. So these are certain desired properties you usually need in your bioink. So to get these desired properties in the bioink, what you can do is you can improve these parameters, like you can increase the polymer density, you can increase the cross-linking, you can formulate multi-material hydrogens, or you can add nanoparticles to the bioink. So these are certain things you can do for getting the desired properties of your bioink. So this is an application of a peptide ink. Okay, so they have prepared a peptide ink. What is a peptide ink? Basically, a peptide ink is it is a ink which is made using short peptides. Okay, short amino acid chains. So it has not been discussed in this course. So I'm not getting into details of what a peptide ink is, but it is basically a bio ink. So what you can do is you can use this peptide ink. You can take these peptides and then you can put it in nanovesicles, or you can attach it to nanofibers, or you can put it inside nanotubes. It will form supramolecular biomaterials. So this is how you're forming the ink, peptide ink. Then you are 3D fabricating, you are generating a 3D fabricated bio ink, and then you're using it for nanomedicine. So applications could be tissue engineering, drug delivery, bioimaging, diagnostic, and organ transplant. The other one is application of protein ink. For protein ink, what you have to do is, from humans, from the patient, you have to isolate some protein, and you have to break the you have to denature the protein first, and then you have to denature the protein, get it into the secondary linear structure. Then you have to break the peptide bonds in between and get free. You have to get sorry for humans, what you have to do is you have to take the building blocks. So you can directly isolate the protein from various sources, like collagen. That is how you form the peptide ink. Peptide ink is basically how you will form is, you can take protein, you can denature the protein, you can to form a secondary structure, and then you can break the peptide bond in certain places and form short peptide. okay, of your required, whatever is your application. Depending on your application, you can make short peptide chains, and then you can make a ink according to how it has been represented here. For protein ink, your protein source could be various proteins like collagen, gelatin, fibrinogen, elastin. It could be silk fibrin, silk pyridine, keratin, or egg white, soy protein, milk, whey. So different sources. You can also take from human source as well. And then what you will do is you will make an ink. Basically, you have to form an ink in the same way. You have to choose a scaffold, a hydrogel. You will add these proteins to it. You will make protein based inks, which will have different biofunctions, mechanics, and accessibility. You have to 3D print it. You have to sol gel. You know what is sol gel transition? Do you know what is sol gel transition? Sol gel transition. Any idea about sol gel transition? Solvent, solvent, and gelation. No, not solvent actually, from solution to gel. So basically, your material was initially in solution phase and then it will turn gel. Okay, so sol gel transition is that. I don't remember if it was mentioned in your course or not. I think it was mentioned in this course, sol gel, and basically depending on the conditions provided, you form two kinds of sol gels. One is an aerogel, the other one is a xerogel. So if it is a different two different kinds of gels are made. So if you are drying your solution at ambient temperature, if you are drying your if you're drying your gel, if you're drying a solution at very at ambient temperature, then it forms a xerogel. Ambient temperature and pressure, it forms a xerogel. Okay, so I'll just write it. So ambient temperature and pressure, you get a xerogel. Okay, and if you are doing supercritical drying, you know what is supercritical drying? So if you're using supercritical drying, yes, kind of similar to lyophilization. So supercritical drying, it will just remove your liquid. It will remove the liquid from the gel, and it will form aerogel, and it has a very high air content in the gel. It is a very high air content, so that's why it is called aerogel. So these are two kinds of gels which are formed depending on what you're doing, how you're drying it. That's sol gel transition, how you're performing. So this sol gel transition is why it is important. It is very important for scaffold formation and all. Do you know why it is important? Because sol gels help you getting porous structures. It generates porous structures. So sol gel transition or sol gel, the method sol gel method is mostly used in 3D cell culture or 3D bioprinting. So this sol gel transition is basically cross-linking. Yeah, there will be a sol gel transition of your 3D printed material. You will cross-link it. It will self-assemble and cross-link, and you have different kinds of applications like tissue scaffolds, clinical implants, disease models, bioelectronics, and drug delivery. Okay. So thank you. This is all for today's live session. So any questions you have? Any questions, anything you want to ask? Any queries? Because this is going to be the last session, live session conducted by me. And do you have, if you have any queries, please feel free to ask. Did you guys receive any mail regarding, presentation link of all the live sessions? I think 3 p.m. RFTA is conducted live sessions, Friday, Saturday, and Monday. Did you get? I sent a mail out to everyone. Yes, with all the presentation link and video link. Okay. So I will upload today's video as well. And you have to, I think you have another extra week by the PMRFTA who is conducting live classes on Friday. She's taking another extra live session. So she will have another material to discuss as well as she will have another video. So after that is done, I will send out another mail with today's presentation and video link as well as the Monday after the Monday's one is uploaded. So all three will be sent in the next mail. Is the exam date scheduled? Is the exam date scheduled? When the exam is? Is the exam date scheduled? Okay, no information currently. Okay. So if the exam date is third week April. Okay, so there is time. I think you will have one month time. Okay, fine. So I guess before that we will be able to send you all the material that has been discussed. So. I don't know if you are you can provide us with feedbacks of the live sessions, that whether the live sessions were helpful for your better and better course understanding or not, so that if needed we will try to improve in next ones. And if you enjoyed the live sessions, if you learned anything new in the live sessions, whether this course was helpful for your understanding. So do you have any queries regarding whatever I discussed today or whatever I've discussed previously, if you did get any time to go through the presentation slides? Anything, any queries or anything you want clarified in whatever has been taught in the course, the NPTEL slides, lecture videos? If you have any queries, you can ask me. Okay, thank you. If you have any queries, you can ask me. And if you don't have any more queries, then this was my last class. So good luck for your exam. I guess it will be MCQ based. So good luck, prepare well, prepare the slides well. These live session slides are not included in your course, only the videos, only the NPTEL lecture videos. So study well, prepare well, and hopefully you will score well. So if you have any more queries, you can mail and we will try as much as possible to answer you regarding the exam. I think I've said in the last live session as well that you do not need to, think like what kind of questions will come or not. It will be easy, just prepare well. Okay, thank you all for joining. And this is me, signing off for this session, for this NPTEL session. Thank you all. You may leave for today.